All right, Jeff, let us move on to our last article. And this one is about very important neighborhood in the Eurodollar system, and that is the Asian neighborhood. And if you were to pick any one particular measure that says, how is the Eurodollar system doing? You could say it would be the reference rate, the US dollar Chinese currency exchange rate. And right now, it's rising. And that's a good sign, Jeff. When the Yuan is getting stronger, that's a good sign for the Eurodollar system. However, in this article, you say, not so fast. We've seen this before in similar circumstances, and you're holding back judgment before celebrating.
Yeah, you're right. CNY could be a really good indicator of what's going on. It could be, but it requires a little bit of corroboration because those Chinese, they tend to be very sneaky and clandestine in how they operate. And unlike most everywhere else around the world who want to be sneaky and clandestine, other places around the world at least report their clandestine and sneaky activities where the Chinese don't. And then, by the way, the Chinese have access to pretty much anything, anywhere within their reach, which includes places like Hong Kong. So the potential for them doing sneaky, clandestine things is through the roof, where it isn't, necessarily everywhere else. So, yes, CNY rising. That's a reflation indication, but it has to have some kind of corroboration behind it. Otherwise, we get really suspicious.
One of those items would be an increase in foreign exchange reserves on the balance sheet of the People's Bank of China. Is that true? Did we see that previously? Are we seeing that now corresponding with the rise?
Let's be clear here what we're talking about. Reflation, to me, and what our understanding means, the dollar system is expanding again, or at least it's expanding at a better rate than it had been during these Eurodollar events or your squeezes, global dollar shortages. So if there's more dollars theoretically, and these are virtual bank liability dollars, they're not actual physical currency. So if the banking system is expanding the Eurodollar system, we would expect those virtual dollars to end up in more people's hands. And where it relates to places like China, we would expect more of those dollars. If there's more of them, they're going to flow into China. That's going to raise the currency exchange rate against the dollar. And then they would show up in official as well as private hands, because that's the way China works. So we would expect, if there is legitimate reflation going on, more dollars in the system, there would be more dollars in the central bank's balance sheet as well as in the official safe pocket.
And then we're not seeing that this time around. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if we go back to 2017, which was a reflationary period, that's exactly what we saw. Chinese yuan turned around in early 2017 from the depths around 7. And we saw treasuries go on, the tick data confirm, the PBOC's balance sheet confirmed, the safe data all confirmed that there were dollars flowing into China. And that backed up the idea that the Chinese yuan was rising. However, there were already some, suspicions and indications that that wasn't the only thing that was going on. The Hong Kong dollar, for example, was behaving almost exactly identically inverse to the Chinese yuan, which you start to wonder, all right, what's really going on there? And then in September 2017, something happened in the early part of that month. Again, we can talk about that some other time, but treasury bills, repo, all this stuff came up in early September 2017. And oh, by the way, Chinese yuan dropped, Hong Kong dollar strengthened, and exactly mirrored opposite. And from the rest of the year, from that period forward, the treasuries and the dollars and the foreign exchange assets stopped going on into the official hands like we had seen beforehand. However, Chinese yuan, CNY, kept rising. In fact, it rose very quickly between October 2017 and January 2018, which was, if you remember, that was the apex of inflation hysteria, that late 2017 sounds almost exactly like late 2020. It was, mainstream media stories of inflation were everywhere. Central bankers talking positively about how recovery was going to be coming. Forceful recovery was coming next year, 2018 in that previous case, 2021 in our current case. And then, we have rising Chinese yuan. We have all these things that made it seem like, okay, things are really going in the reflationary direction. But the one thing we didn't have was something corroborating CNY going up. That would have lended some more evidence to the idea that this reflation was in fact turning out to be inflationary.
You did find something interesting in the Treasury International Capital data for Hong Kong for that period, though, didn't you?
Yeah, that specific period, that particular 4 months, December or November 2017, December 2017, and on into 2018, that period. What we saw from the tick data is that seemingly out of nowhere, U.S. banks began lending massive amounts of dollars. I think it was about $27 billion, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in the context of what we're talking about, it is. And I think it was an 80% increase in 4 months. So U.S. banks were lending that many dollars to Hong Kong banks for what? Who the hell knows? But then you start piecing together this inverse relationship between the Hong Kong dollar and what the Chinese officials can do and might be doing in lieu of actual dollar flows onto their balance sheets. And you wonder, maybe they were using Hong Kong, which is a much better lending opportunity, less risky lending opportunity for U.S. banks than Chinese banks were, especially in 2017. And so it kind of, you wonder if this rise in CNY was not something that was engineered through backdoor proxy means, which, by the way, is a legitimate central bank tactic and strategy. It's been practiced all over the world. You don't want to spend your reserves if you don't have to, because you don't want to paint a big target on your back.
And do we see anything at all that's similar today? Because let's bring this up to the present. The CNY is rising. There's concern about inflation. But what don't we see, right? We don't see an increase in foreign exchange reserves. Anything in the tick data, I know that's a couple months behind. Anything in the Hong Kong currency? Or are you just raising the subject to say, be wary, don't buy in just yet?
Yeah, well, I think it's even more than that. I mean, the parallels to 2017 are, hey, inflation hysteria, because it's getting hysterical in late 2020 again. People are, for reasons I can't fathom, are absolutely convinced that we're going to have an inflationary breakout, and without realizing we've gone through this very same situation just 3 years ago. And one of the pieces behind it is CNY. And so we look at CNY. You and I, Emil, in Eurodollar University and the Eurodollar topic, we've been looking at the Chinese bank, the People's Bank of China balance sheet, the safe data, the tick data, all these other things for a lot longer than just the last few months. And it's absolutely curious that we don't see dollars flowing into China in their official hands, which they would be if there was anything like a reflation going on. So the fact that CNY is rising isn't necessarily itself reflective of anything other than something else. And we don't see the kinds of reflection, or we don't see the kinds of evidence and corroboration that would suggest this is any different than it was in 2017 and 2018. And then when we look around the rest of the Eurodollar system, there's even less positive now than there was 3 years ago. In fact, it really looks like that CNY's increase is maybe the only thing that looks consistent with a reflationary or inflationary episode. And so there are major questions about CNY. Obviously, there are major questions about the dollar system. And we have to wonder, do people not pay attention to these things? I mean, this happened 3 years ago, but because most people don't know they should pay attention to the dollar system. They don't know that there's all this stuff going on behind the scenes. It's what's going on in 2020 to many people seems like it's brand new.
That's how you end the article, Jeff. Let me read this to the audience because I thought it was very powerful. Quote, "Unfortunately, everything I've just written has been hidden from the public's view. While it may turn out that we're repeating history, for most people, they'd never know it. That's the corruption."
Right, and that's what goes back to what we talked about in the earlier segments. In a lot of cases, monetary authorities and central bank, they don't even know they should be paying attention to this stuff. They're still catching up on these financial products. The proliferation of products, as Alan Greenspan talked about 2 decades ago, that took place 3 and 4 decades before he even talked about it. They're still catching up on what happened over the last half century. And so that's why we stay in the dark, and why people don't realize these things take place, and why they're important is because economics has done such a bad job of paying attention to the monetary system that nobody even knows what really goes on in them.
All right, Jeff. Well, this show was a great one. And dear audience, if you're enjoying it as well, this show was brought to you with the support of viewers like you. And if you're interested in showing your support, you can do so by calling 1-800-555-5555-555-51. And volunteers are standing by to take your donation to help support this show and other programs like it on this channel. Presently, we are only accepting uncut, unpolished gems that are easily fenced, but maybe in the future we'll accept something more. Jeff, thank you very much for a great show. I will talk to you again next week.
Okay, Emil, take care.